I am really, really pleased to be here this morning to kick off this conference with the three people who are serving on this panel to really address the kinds of leadership issues that Patrick described. So the challenging external world needs leaders, I believe, with the capacity and discipline to take the time, which of course is a leader's most valuable asset, to create the relationships with those they lead that are critically necessary for a collaborative work environment where those led, where the people they lead are inspired by the leader and each other to achieve goals and objectives. So discipline, focus on creating the kind of relationships that are needed to solve and address the issues that Patrick described. And our three panelists are incredibly well qualified to address those questions. So, farthest on my right is Noah Krolov, who has experience in state government, and then as the Deputy Chief of Staff to then Arizona Governor Janet Napolitano, then the Chief of Staff at DHS. So you can imagine his experience in local, state, and federal government. And now he followed all of that by creating his own consulting firm that focuses on, quote, homeland and national security policy, crisis management, and growth strategies, all of which cannot occur without effective leadership. And next to Noah is Tonya Williams, who served in North Carolina, a state government, as the general counsel to the president pro tem of the North Carolina Senate. Then in the federal government as the chief of staff and general counsel to chief deputy whip in the U.S. House of Representatives. Then a list as long as my arm of one company after another, each of which led to ever-increasing broader responsibilities. And she's now the chief executive officer of Blue Home Advisors with the goal of, quote, helping leadership teams accurately interpret events, trends, and the increasingly complex demands of a rapidly changing environment. She wrote that before we asked her to speak at this conference today. And next to me is Rob Schreiber. And there are those people in this world who create public policy. We know who they are. There are those, most of whom in this room are in the business of implementing public policy. And those who litigate the created public policy about whether the implementation has been done consistent with the goal of the law. So Rob started his career, let me just say he's done all these things, and he started his career as the assistant counsel for the National Treasury Employees Union, where he was described internally and externally as an aggressive litigator in behalf of federal employee rights. Then he came to OPM for a first tour of duty as the Deputy General Counsel for Policy. But he not only created the policy, but created and implemented 7 presidential executive orders. But then, he decided he didn't have enough challenges, so he became the assistant director for the national health care operations just as the Affordable Care Act was being stood up. So he played that role at OPM. Then he left to go to the first to state government, D.C. government, to help them set up their Affordable Care Act portal. Then he dipped into the private sector, but, came back. He came back. And I was at his swearing in, and he said, I came back because I wanted to come back. This is not a revenue enhancer for me. I came back because I wanted to be a public servant. Right? Right. So, with that, please welcome our three panelists. So, I'm going to start out today by asking this question. I'm going to ask you all to think for a moment about the theme of this conference, the future and the chaos that I think are associated with that. Think about what's out there in the environment in which you lead from your current position, that poses the greatest personal challenge for you, the greatest personal challenge for you as a leader today. So let's start with you, Noah.
I think the thing that poses the greatest challenge for me, both personally and as someone who is in business, is the general erosion of trust in our institutions and the way that people perceive our democratic institutions. And I don't say that as a manager. I just say that as an American and as a human being, because I think that first of all, I should start by thanking all of you for what you do, and thank you for being a part of Key and what Key does, because I think executive education is often underappreciated, and so the fact that you're participating in this shows a commitment to excellence that I think we need in our public servants, and I'm grateful to you for what you do, and I'm grateful that American University has demonstrated a real commitment to ongoing education and lifelong learning that's absolutely critical, and that in my view sort of gets to my concern is that I think over the last 7 or 8 years, I've seen a real erosion of faith in our democratic institutions that seeps into the private sector, that seeps into the educational sector, that seeps into basically every sector in society, and it causes real leadership challenges, in my view, because if we are not all rowing from the same basic postulate that we are living in the greatest country in the world, it creates significant drag on everything that happens in society, including what happens in business, including what happens in the government sector, including what happens in the academic sector, and including what happens in our children's very education. And I've got an 18-year-old and a 13-year-old. I've got a lot of faith in the next generation that are moving forward in our society. But I think that they are living in a world very different from the world that I grew up in, and they have all kinds of reasons to question where our country's going. And I think that for me, that is the greatest challenge of today: is how do we collectively help restore faith in our democratic institutions. I think I will quote Hani Farid, the great professor at the Information School at Berkeley. I think there's real reason to wonder what as he says, the 12 idiots that run the search and social media companies in the United States are doing. And I think it's something that is going to continue to be the greatest leadership challenge of our day, which is an erosion of trust and faith in our democratic institutions.
Thank you. Tanya?
Yeah, I'd echo what you've said there. It is, I think, our biggest problem, and I think the contributor to it is, just the incredible volume of information that's out there. And how do we decipher it? How do we, understand what the facts are? How do we prioritize? Because the problems are big. But I think the other thing that, with all of that information, with all of the different platforms where you can get your information, you can choose your news, which is bad news all around for all of us, I think is just the comfort that we seem to have come to with doing nothing, with electing officials that just say no we don't demand alternatives to someone saying no to a proposal or solution. And I think that's really dangerous, and it leaves a vacuum for people who have bad intentions to do their worst. When we're not engaged and when we don't hold our government officials and public servants accountable, then we end up in a place where you would question institutions. You do wonder whether or not they can do the job that they were created to do. And I think that vacuum leads us to some of the things that we'll talk about today, very drastic solutions, an either-or sort of scenario where we have forgotten our history and sort of why we have the safeguards and the things that we have in place, and just leaves us in a very dangerous and vulnerable place.
We did not coordinate at all ahead of this panel, but I have to echo the comments from Noah and Tanya, and I'll add a little bit of my own flavor. But first, I want to thank everybody here for what you do, the work that you do. Agree that it's great that there's this key program that provides this executive leadership training. And it's an honor for me to be at a leadership conference talking about leadership and leaders with the man who taught me more about that than anybody other than my father, a high school football coach. So thanks for including me today, Bob. So I think the thing that I would add is, I grew up in the 1970s, post-civil rights, post-Watergate, and we had sort of a consensus in this country around some core principles of our democracy. People that wanted to be in Congress, wanted to work for the government, they did so because they cared about causes and they wanted to make progress on those causes. And there was a lot of disagreement about which causes were more important and how you should approach solutions to advance those causes. And that was healthy. There was healthy debate. And everybody was kind of bought in that, that's what we are here to do. The Watergate era brought about an increased emphasis on transparency in the government, ethics, trust in media. And so many of those things have broken down now. And in fact, you have people who are elected to Congress or come and work in agencies whose only cause is to destroy the government and destroy those agencies. And so if we don't have that common understanding anymore, that we're all in this together to try to make the government work better for the causes we believe in, and we can have healthy debates about what those causes are and what the solutions are. If we don't have that social compact anymore, and in fact we have large portions of the public that think really the American democracy is not the solution anymore, not going to come and participate in my government to help make it better, but to destroy it, then, where are we from a starting point? And so I think that's a big challenge that I would add to what Noah and Tanya mentioned.
So each of you, in your own way, has described an environment that is very, very externally uncertain, very uncertain. So people who do work bring that uncertainty to the work environment. They bring it. So my question to you is, as a leader, how do you translate the external world into a world of work where chaos doesn't rule and enough connection exists where good work can occur? So what do you do as a leader to create the connection with people who are so nervous, concerned, and facing chaos externally? Noah, you want to start?
I'm like a tyrant. Honestly, patriotism, service to country, love of America, I can't shake those feelings. So with people I work with my employees, with the staff and faculty at Berkeley, I'm tyrannical just about patriotism. And, American University has this incredible institution that is Amy Dacey running the Sign Institute. And Amy and I have spent hours, days, years, months, years talking about a little bit what Tanya was saying. If we don't proactively make the decision to do something, there's something wrong. And that's kind of what I try to impart to my employees in my consulting firm, to my colleagues that I work with, to staff members and faculty at Berkeley. I'm sort of tyrannical about being pro-democracy, being pro-America, and I just carry it everywhere I go, and that's really how I try to deal with it. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's how I approach it. And I just don't accept that we can't have a common premise as a nation or as people or as colleagues or as adversaries. I do believe that I'm happy to have adversaries here in the United States with whom and with which I share a common framework. And just because I'm a Democrat doesn't mean I have to hate Republicans. And just because my Republican colleagues may not agree with me doesn't mean that they have to hate my point of view. And I think if we all relentlessly keep working at that, we will make progress. But I completely agree with what Tanya said. There is a stasis that we have to overcome that I worry that all of us are not necessarily always thinking about that.
Yeah, I think what you said is, really, really important. I think that reminding people that it's not personal, right? That you can have your views and you don't have to hate the person who you disagree with. And I think that it's gotten really emotional in a way that is unfamiliar to me. I used to love to I just seek out people who had a different opinion to debate about it. That was fun, right? Like to kind of try and convince someone that you were right, or learn, actually in conversation with them, learn that maybe I'm not as right as I thought I was. Were big moments for me, and I think we don't do that anymore. I think the other thing that's really important in leading is to remind people that the chaos is a tactic. It's a distraction, right? Things may not even be as chaotic as they seem. And I think here in Washington in particular, we've kind of allowed this narrative about chaos to win the day. And you do have to remember that it's a tactic, and I think you have to approach it, the problem, with sort of an organized approach to problem solving. You really have to spend time defining the problem. You have to spend time thinking about solutions and perspectives in a way that will help you get to a better solution, that helps you take in all of the things that are happening in the external world. That's what I spend my time doing these days, really saying this is what's happening, right? These are the trends, and this is how you make an informed decision where you're not surprised because you are taking those things into account. And I think the other thing is, and this happens, I think, a lot with politicians, is we lose touch with the world as it is, as opposed to the way we want it to be. And so we're really surprised when we get to solutions that everyone doesn't agree with us, that everyone's perspective isn't the same as ours. And so I think encouraging folks to people that you're leading to listen, to look for the win-win, to really try to not be distracted by the chaos, and to really try and think about prioritizing in ways where you're elevating the most important things. And we're debating some really important things. I can't even believe that we're debating the basics of democracy, that we're fighting fights that we, put to bed, or so you'd hoped, many years ago. And they've come back to face us again today, because I think that in some ways we've taken our eye off the ball and just assumed that some of the norms would always be there, and we haven't been quick to respond when they've been challenged.
I'm going to start with a little personal angle, and I promise I'll connect it back up. So I'm somebody who suffers from anxiety for many, many, many years, and it makes it hard for me to do things like get on the metro or fly. I get claustrophobic, all that stuff. So I've been in therapy for all of these years working on this, and what I've learned is that as a tactic to deal with anxiety, I've tried to control as many things as possible. And so a lot of the work has been about understanding what was within my power to control and accepting the lack of control over things that I can't. Accepting that really all these things I'm trying to do to control things are kind of an illusion anyway, because I might walk out of the hotel and something might fall on me or I might get hit by a car. I have no control over that, right? And so the way that to connect that back up is, and this is something that I'm talking to the team at OPM, right? The political team. The whole country, no matter kind of what your views are about the upcoming election, the whole country is anxious about it. And anxiety is at a very high level, and there's many factors, I think, that come into the pandemic, what's going on in the country, all of those things. We in the federal government, we have such an opportunity because we actually have some things that we can control. We actually are able to shut out some of the outside noise and work every day because it's our profession on making the country better, on strengthening our institutions, on empowering workers, on enabling people to feel like their authentic selves. Like, these are things that we work on every day. And so what I try to do as a leader is acknowledge the craziness, the chaos, acknowledge that there's a lot that's out of our control, but focus on what we can do and lift that up, because it's not a normal opportunity that everybody in the country has. It's what we're paid to do every day. Come in and try to make a difference. And that's why I love working with career civil servants. I think career civil servants are more equipped to do this than anybody else in the country, because they come into the government, they're valued for their subject matter expertise, they care about whatever their issue is, they care deeply about that. And whatever the outside noise, because they deal with outside noise all the time. They deal with transitions, they deal with oversight, they deal with media coverage all the time. Career civil servants have to deal with that. And every day what you guys do is you put it aside and you work to make just that little bit more of a difference. And then you look back after a year, after 5 years, after a 30-year career, and you can say, look at that. Look what I helped do. And so that's how I try to connect people back. Shut the noise out. You can only control what you can control. And what an opportunity we have because of the jobs that we're so fortunate to do.
What I heard here was Noah, who takes particular care to let those he leads know who he is, what his values are. If I signed up to work for Noah, I would know him, and I would know whether I wanted to work for him or not. And if I chose to work for him, I would be able to connect with him at a pretty basic level, because we would be working on the same things toward the same goals. And what I heard from Tanya was, hey, look, in this community we're creating, we need to encourage disagreements to get better results. But that comes in the context of trust and understanding and acceptance. And what I heard from Rob is focus on what we can control. And he didn't say this, but I'm going to say it. Celebrate the success over the things that you have control. So this is just my wrap. I think federal employees do an absolutely lousy job, at celebrating success. Because what happens is success occurs, and then it's on to the next. No one really stops and says, not as a leader, I don't say it to those I lead, hey, thank you. We really knocked it out of the park. And some leaders think that that's good enough if I do it on a quarterly basis, whether you need it or not. As opposed to when I see success, I honor it, I acknowledge it, and I thank those I lead for the work that they've done. So, let me ask this question. I define discretionary energy as the energy that an employee might give to a boss that because it's discretionary, by definition, the boss can't extract it from me. I have to choose to give it. So my question to each of you is, what in the leadership environment you work to create, what steps, what actions do you take to create an environment where those you lead choose to give you their discretionary energy?
So I think it's a great question, Bob. And again, I'll talk from my perspective as a leader in the federal government. As I said before, what I love about federal employees is that they care about whatever it is that they're doing, whatever job they have. And I have people at OPM that are experts in the most obscure technical part of Title V. Nobody else in the world knows about it, and they care so deeply about that part of Title V. Let me take it from what is the most demoralizing to them? If they're not put in a position to make a difference, if they run into roadblock after roadblock, if they try to be creative and they get shut down, if they try to talk to the community and get stakeholder input and try to implement that and it doesn't go anywhere, it's the most demoralizing thing for a federal employee because that's what motivated them to come to the job in the first place. And so what I try to do as a leader to create a situation where employees will choose to provide that discretionary energy is, number one, set up in an environment where that creativity is fostered, those opportunities to think big thoughts. I encourage that, and I try to encourage that throughout the culture of the organization. And then you've got to pick some fights for your people. Like the inertia will kill you if you just leave them to their own devices. And some will get some things through because maybe they have a lot of skill in that area, relationships or whatever. But a lot of people, especially newer people to government or younger people, they won't know how to navigate the bureaucracy to actually get that thing done. And if you don't fight for them, if you don't set up that meeting with the general counsel or work with them on the procurement strategy or get to your external engagement person and say, hey, this is important. If you don't do that for them, they're going to struggle to do the very thing that brought them to the government in the first place. And then if they can't get done the thing that they're trying to get done, they're not only not going to give you that discretionary energy, but they're going to leave and go find somewhere else where somebody is going to bat for them. So I think it's important, and it's too much to do it all the time on every issue. You can't take everything to the mat, but you got to find those ones that are just really, really important to somebody that you think they've got something going on there and they need some help to get it to the finish line. And you got to clear that path for them so they can see the impact of their work.
It's interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking about the different types of work that we do. So you work with people who have deep expertise, and there can be a churn there when your issue is not up, when people aren't talking about what you know so much about, what you've dedicated your time and energy to, and how to inspire them. And I was thinking it's different for the work that I did, where you're opening the paper. Your job is what's on to the top of the fold. Right? I'm a generalist. I don't have deep expertise. Thank God for the people who, have the expertise that you are talking about, and the fact that you can count on them and pull them up, and you should lift them up as well, because when you're negotiating and moving things in the White House or in Congress to get things over the finish line, you need that expertise, and there's no way there's no way to work without it. But it is a different type of inspiration to get folks to do that work. For me, I think it's always been sort of stylistic that helps. I very much believe in player coach type style of leadership, where folks, your team sees that you're willing to do the work. Even better if you've already done the work, because it helps with credibility. And you're in the trenches with them. You're not just telling them what to do. You're helping them to think through the problems that they're trying to solve. I think it's important to bring them into the big picture as well, to help them understand why their work is important, to see the threads that connect the dots for them, to understand where the piece of the puzzle that they have ownership over, and how important that is to getting the job done. Because there are a lot of priorities out there. There are a lot of things going on. And I think it's really important to help them keep their eye on the ball and big picture. Because if not, they can really get lost, and there are more losses than wins. So you have to keep them inspired, I think, in that way. I think the other thing is to give folks credit and visibility, right? These are tough jobs. And when people do great work, I think it's important to give them the credit. No one likes working for a boss, and we've all had them, right? You do all the work, and they carefully take and edit what you've done and claim it as their own and keep on going, and never say, and also, there's this brilliant person on my team who did this, or who went above and beyond to do this, or was creative in the way that they thought about this. And I think that's inspiring. And when people see that you'll do that for their team, not just go to bat for them, but also to, give them credit, because it truly makes you look good as a leader. I think that they'll work harder, and it creates this interesting sort of competition too, where we all raise our game, because we want to be better. And that there's an opportunity and chance for you to contribute and grow within the organization, or to grow outside, or in a different capacity. So I think that's really important to uplift them.
I think you would have been a really good boss. I agree with everything that's already been said, and I don't have that much to add, although I will say that I do think there's a fundamental difference between the discretionary energy that is offered or made available in the private sector versus the public sector. And I think that in the private sector, you get discretionary energy from employees and from colleagues based on a financial proposition in the end. Whereas in the civil service and in public service, I think where I sought most to find discretionary energy from people I work with was in the fulfillment of their mission. Public service is a mission-driven enterprise, and I was inspired every day by the civil servants at the Department of Homeland Security, fulfilling their missions in the context of a very difficult operating environment. And I think we all are in or have been in public service, so everyone here knows how challenging Homeland Security can be. And what I found most inspiring in my role as chief of staff of the agency was the day-to-day outputs from career civil servants operating in incredibly challenging environments, finding all kinds of discretionary energy that they brought to their jobs on a daily basis. I mean, I'll say it in this room. I found most of the political appointees annoying because they were constantly telling you how much discretionary energy they were offering you, but never actually getting to achievement of the discretionary energy that you wanted, versus going to the Del Rio sector of the Border Patrol in Texas and seeing Border Patrol agents working alone, keeping incredible hours, having to earn overtime to do their job just because they were trying to protect the country. I found that incredibly inspiring, and I found the fulfillment of discretionary energy by the career civil service workforce at Homeland Security incredibly motivational for me as a leader. And that's where I derived my energy to have my own discretionary energy to contribute to the mission of the department. So, I think that's all I have to add. I think these two said it best.
So, all of the research about what motivates federal employees to perform more and better next year than how they performed last year is how much they feel connected to the mission of their organization and whether or not their boss creates that link and supports you as you move towards accomplishing the mission of the organization. And what Rob said about taking the time to work with individuals on issues that they feel are important, and you as well, but you give them your most valuable asset, and that is time. So let me ask the three of you this. A lot of people talk about leadership, but fail, in my view, to recognize that leadership requires some non-delegable tasks that only the leader can perform. What you described, Rob, was creating a one-on-one relationship with a direct report to help that person. But there's more than just that. So my question is, how do you find the time? You all have very busy jobs where you're often reacting, as you said, Tanya, to what's on the front page. How do you exercise the kind of discipline that I believe every leader needs to do what it is we were just talking about, linking mission and mission accomplishment, speaking directly to those who are direct reports, encouraging the creation of the environment you described? How do you manage that kind of time, which is proactive as opposed to reactive?
I'll go first because I'm terrible at this and hope to learn something. What I've had to do is, because it's not natural, it doesn't come naturally to me. Right? If there's a problem, I want to give everything I can to it. We all do. You want to give 100%. You can't do that. We all have perfectionist tendencies. What's been helpful to me is time blocking, honestly, so that you're making time for that. You have to say, I'm going to spend this time, on development. I'm going to spend this time on personal development. On networking, on all of these things that can slip by, and encourage your team to do that as well. Because if you're not intentional about it, you won't do it. The work will consume you. There is so much to be done. There's so much that you can do. There's so much that you want to do in mission-oriented work. The chaos and noise that we were talking about that is distracting also can just suck up so much of your time. If you're not intentional about it, if you don't schedule things, and if you don't schedule in the important stuff, for me, and then it piles up and creates anxiety because then you're not doing it and you don't feel like you're being a good leader, and problems happen and then it comes crashing in on you, right? And then you have to dedicate time and energy to it, and sometimes you have to undo it. And also, it helps your team to know that they're going to have time with you, that they're going to be able to come and talk to you about things in an organized manner, so that when we get together to talk, it isn't just chaos and crazy. We're deliberate, and we're thinking through things that are important to them, and that gives them me an opportunity to get feedback from them, but for them also to get direction that they need. Now, I say that I've had lots of experience with time blocking, and you can't be too rigid about it because that's another form of anxiety. So just leaving time for those things that are going to occur naturally is important. But I do think that intentionality and having a method of some sort for information sharing, not just one-on-one, but also for the team, I think it is really important in terms of keeping things going, inspiring folks, but making sure that those critical things happen on a regular basis, not just at review time or at the end of the year when you've lost a lot of valuable time.
So as awful as I've made myself sound up here, I don't actually think I'm very particularly smart or capable. And so one of the things that I have always believed is leadership decisions at a certain point have to be made by the leader. But those decisions don't get made without the input of the entire team. And you can't make a good leadership decision if you're not well informed. And a good leader is not well informed unless he or she has taken on the input of the team. And so one of the things that I have always tried to do, in part because of my own feelings of inadequacy about my intelligence, is really derive input from as many sources as possible so as to make the best decision that can be made. And that inherently is about collaboration. And you have to have a leadership structure, but in the end, certainly as was the case at Homeland Security, I think is the case in my current business, I've always felt it important to have a very flat organizational structure so that everyone gets to participate in leadership decisions, and so that when you do make a decision, you really have incorporated sort of a whole of team approach. And I think that leaders who are really autocratic, whether it's in private industry or in government, lose a lot of value in not taking on input from the team, in not being collaborative, because in my view, collaboration is everything, and it's about how you really can make informed decisions as a leader. And in the end, whether the statute says X person has to make the decision or business practice says it, the leaders of organizations that don't take on the right kind of input tend to fail, in my view.
Great points, and I admire Noah's humility. It's a great trait in a leader. I don't think anybody thinks he's not smart. Look, I'm thinking about this question from the perspective, I'm about a year into the deputy director job at OPM, and I'm thinking about how I approached the year. And it's kind of interesting because OPM doesn't often have a Senate-confirmed deputy director, so I had a lot of room to kind of define what this role would be. And what I decided I would do with it was, number one, try to help the different parts of OPM have more of a strategic vision and a strategic direction about what to accomplish. Number two, create the kind of inclusive, collaborative culture as wide and as far across the agency as I could. And number three, be decisive. Don't let things linger. And so, what are the things that I did to try to accomplish that? I thought about what my own priorities would be as deputy director and I divided them up into like 15 areas, and I brought cross-functional teams in, and I said, okay, what are we going to do in this area this year? What does the end look like, and then what's the plan to get there? And then, there are different kinds of meetings, right? And I think what's inevitable as a leader is that you're going to have a ton of meetings. And then the question is, like, what are you going to do with those meetings? And so I'd have meetings where there are progress checks on, we said this is what we were going to do. How's it coming along? Where can I help? There are decision meetings, brief an issue up to the deputy director, make a decision, let the team move on. And then there are my meetings. And my meetings are very different. I don't have agendas for my meetings. I don't have pre-briefs, memos for my meetings. And these might be like check-in meetings or whatever. Instead, I start with, how are you doing? How's life? How are things going in the job? Are you getting out of the job what you want to get out of the job? So what I'm trying to say is, you do have some control there and ability to use your own time on these things that show people that you care about them and that you care about what they're trying to accomplish, and so that they want to go to bat for you. And I think one other thing that's really important, and again, I so appreciate that I had this opportunity. I was able to build a small but mighty team in the office of the deputy director, and I was able to bring people on board who shared my view about the culture that we should have. And we have lots of subject matter experts across OPM that work on their subject matter expertise. My team works on the culture all the time. They have their own subject matter things and projects that they're working on too. But when my little team gets together, we talk about the culture and what the impact is that we want to have on the culture and how we want people at OPM to feel their experience has been. And I feel very lucky to have the support of the director and the ability to spend some of my time doing that.
Those of you who are key graduates will recognize that what Rob does as a leader is he has a check-in prior to the start of his meetings, where people have the opportunity to share whatever's on their mind, which over time does create a kind of connection that wouldn't otherwise exist. Would that be right?
Absolutely. I mean, work is one part of all of our complex lives. And I think work is, there's a community feature to work. And having those kinds of connections helps to build a stronger community.
Let me see if there are any questions that any of you might have. Please do not be shy. These folks can handle anything that you throw their way, I'm sure. Does anybody have a question?
Norman Lear passed away recently, and I don't know if anybody here is old enough to remember shows like All in the Family and The Jeffersons and Maude. One of the things I think Norman Lear did really well was take different perspectives and humanize each person who had those perspectives. I guess my first question is, do you see anybody out there today who's doing that? Secondly, do you agree with my premise? And third, what do you think people can do to help humanize the others, which I think is lacking today?
I can start talking about the last point while maybe we think about the others. I mean, I agree with the premise of your point. And, I watched All in the Family when I was a kid and have even gone back as I've grown up to realize that all the jokes I didn't get. So it's kind of fun to go back and watch it again. I think, in addition to Bob's point about the federal government being terrible at celebrating successes, I also think we're not so great at telling the story of our successes and telling the story of our successes in a way that humanizes the people that we're helping and the work that we are doing. And so I would answer your last point first by saying we really need to work on how we tell these stories in a way that connect up what the federal government, the bureaucracy, what these people in Washington, D.C., and by the way, 85% are not in Washington, D.C., what we're doing and the impact that we're having so that it does humanize it. You know, if you'll indulge me for just 1 minute, I'll tell you one of the best experiences I've had at OPM since I came back this time. We had a group of wildland firefighters come in to meet with us, and it was before the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed. And they told Director Ahuja and me what their experiences were like. This is a profession that at one time was a seasonal profession, and the fire season has gotten so long that it's now a career, but the system hasn't caught up. And so you have people that are parachuting behind the lines, putting themselves in the most peril to protect life and property, that are then done with their shift and going to sleep in their car because they can't afford housing. And I thought about those people when Congress passed this really weird and complex provision for pay for wildland firefighters. And we were like throwing up our hands what to do with this. But like that personal experience drove me and my team every day to figure it out. And we ultimately were able to put $600 million in the pockets of those wildland firefighters. And then they came back after that happened. And they told us firsthand the personal impact that made and how appreciative they were of what the president had done, what the Congress had done, the work that we had done with the Forest Service, with the Interior Department, to get that money to them in fire season when they needed it most. And so that was a great example of that humanizing effect that I would like to see how we could take that and just multiply it exponentially.
Norman Lear was brilliant in ways that were frustrating and revealing. And I'm not sure that he got enough credit for it. I actually got to work with him later in life with the Kellogg Foundation. I think part of his brilliance was bringing these very emotional and complex questions and ideas, and the complexity of our humanity and our difference to the screen in a safe way where we could laugh about it. And it made it easier to talk about. Talking about race, talking about poverty, talking about racism, talking about class differences, gender roles, really hard topics that we struggle with. We struggle to even have a conversation about it because we're so nervous about offending someone. And because there's power in the dynamics of those relationships, and to change that really is consequential. And so when I've gone back and watched some of these things, some of which don't age well, and you're like, "Ooh, can you believe you can say that on TV?" To me, it's brilliant, and he continued to do it, throughout his life and career in ways that I think allowed people to think about it and to confront things in their homes, through the medium of television. In that, I hope were conversation starters, or at the very least gave them some perspective. Some of the things maybe were caricatures, led to caricatures of folks, and that's a danger in comedy. You have to take it for what it is. But I do think that it is important for us to open up a space for these tough conversations, to deal with difficult problems, and so that we can really think about them with the benefit of the perspective of people who are living the reality. And that's really hard for us to do, especially, we have greater distance because of the way we work, because of the way we live nowadays. And you can how many of you find yourself in the room where you're the only person that holds your perspective, or have been asked to offer the perspective of an entire group or race or gender Or even worse, you look around and you're like, well, we're talking about making decisions, and there's nobody with that perspective in this room. And so, again, a place where we have to be intentional, but also figure out ways to have those conversations. And I do just think he was brilliant in doing that through laughter.
I completely agree. And you asked in part who out there does that today. So, I mean, I think in general, and something that concerns me greatly is the fact that we as Americans don't see each other anymore, and don't hear what we're saying to each other anymore. And I don't think there's anything wrong with diversity. I don't think there's anything wrong with being different than someone else. I think that's what makes our country great. And I think what made Norman Lear great was he, through humor, really identified the differences between people and saw them and recognized them on the screen, which I think made all of us who grew up in that era sort of ask ourselves some of those very questions that he was putting on the screen. What does this mean? How am I different? Why is this person different from me? And by the way, like, that's America, right? That's what makes us great. I mean, I remember when the decision to legalize gay marriage was decided by the Supreme Court, I literally took I think he was 10 then, about 10. Anyway, I took my 10-year-old son, who is not gay, upstairs in my house, and I sat down and we read that decision together. And I remember being very emotional about it because it showed the progress of our nation. And it demonstrated that a group that had previously been discriminated against for historically was arriving to a place of equality. And I thought that decision, while I am not gay and while I do not have a gay member of my family, showed incredible progress. And I feel like that's a little bit what Norman Lear did. And to answer your question about who I think does it well, or who we think does it well today, I think there are a number of public officials who have a real talent for articulating and seeing Americans for who they are and seeing the richness of our American fabric for what it is. I mean, this may be just me, but I think the Transportation Secretary does a really good job of that. There's a Attorney General of the state of New Mexico, a guy named Raul Torres, who I think is unbelievable at characterizing our differences, embracing our differences without minimizing them or without diminishing them. I think there are a number of public officials out there today that do a really good job of it, but those are a couple who I've seen.
So it's interesting to listen to your responses, because what I hear is leaders have a role and can play a central role in naming the undiscussable issues in the workplace and creating space for those issues to be discussed. Because, when I sit in on the boss's meetings, it might be on my mind, the issue might be on my mind, or 3 or 4 others, but, I don't know whether I should raise it. I don't know what my colleague would say. But if the boss raises it and makes it discussable and creates a safe environment where that discussion can take place, and then I would just include a little bit about Rob said, can I put it in a story? Can I raise it in the context of a story that's relevant to the people I lead? All of those things, I think, are really important as a leader who's interested in creating a community or creating an environment where people feel safe and at the same time energized. So this is the last question, you all. What's your one piece of advice? What's your one piece of advice to new leaders who are now trying to find their way in the world you all have just spent almost an hour describing?
I think that listening is really the hardest and most important thing. And I mean, actively listening. It's hard being a leader with limited time. Sometimes we're like, okay, I know where you're going with this, right? Let me just move it along. But I think that listening is really important. I think that increasingly, more so now, you just have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And having comfort with ambiguity and without having all the facts. And yes, I'm talking to myself, Tanya Williams. It's hard to be decisive when you don't have all the facts because you want to get it right. And especially in public service where the spotlight can shine pretty brightly when you don't. It's less forgiving than in business and tech and places sometimes where, it's like, oh, move fast, break things, fail fast. And it's sort of celebrated in a different way, which, just underscores what you were saying before about celebrating public servants and public service. I swear, I say this all the time. We need a PR campaign, right? We need to take that kind of approach. Because the news is only going to report on the things that are sensational or, when things don't go well, right? But that doesn't mean that the whole of government isn't doing amazing things, that we aren't getting things right, that we're not trying, we're not perfect. And sometimes I just think we need an organized approach to the celebration, to the uplifting, and to the telling of stories, and to helping people make the connections between government action and the things that are good in their lives. I think we just sort of take it for granted that these things are there, and people utilize government and count on government and are incentivized by government in business and in their personal lives in lots of ways, but then are really quick to turn and talk about all of the bad things and demonize the really good work of government. And so I just think I wish we could take a proactive approach to consistently telling people about the good work that's done and encouraging them and inspiring them to come in and work with us, to partner with us, to do the collective problem solving that needs to be done for us all to do well. So that's my plug.
So Rob should definitely have the last word. But I agree again entirely, which is weird because I don't normally agree with everything that people say. But I share your view. It's take on inputs, relentlessly take on inputs. And what I think about government and what I think about what you all do, it's very different than the private sector. And I'm going to just repeat a little bit of what you said. In the private sector, failure is almost a requirement. You're encouraged to fail, and failure is viewed as a positive thing because if you haven't failed a couple times, then you can't possibly have learned anything. The opposite is 100% true in government. Failure is not an option, and failure is generally viewed as problematic in the government. And that's true of senior managers. It's true of GS-12s. It's true in the mind of the public, which is why the government and the public sector gets no space to operate, because you make one mistake and you've breached the trust of the public, right? And that creates a very difficult environment in which to operate. And so what I would say is you can only mitigate that by being incredibly collaborative and by really taking on input and really hearing and seeing your colleagues next to you and understanding what their worldview is, because as I keep repeating, we don't see each other as much as we should in America today. And when you see your colleagues and you hear what they have to say and you take on their inputs, your performance will be improved by that as a leader. You won't always get everything right, but you will improve because you have taken on a diversity of thought. And I think that it is axiomatic that it is our diversity that makes us a great country. It is axiomatic that it is the diversity of thought and perspective that we bring that makes us an exceptional nation. America is exceptional, and it's exceptional because of who we are, and it is exceptional because of our diversity. And that is in my view, completely translatable into leadership. It is understanding what is around you, taking it and incorporating it into what is a more comprehensive whole in decision making. And so I really do think that is my best advice to those of you in this room who are leaders and are future leaders. Just suck it all in and see the people around you, because if you don't see the people around you, you're missing what's great about our country.
So well said, and it's been such an honor to be up here with you two. I feel like I should be in one of those seats just taking in what you are all saying. I'm going to try to tie together what Noah and Tanya said and say, okay, so first and foremost, I think that diversity, a lot of other related initiatives, things that we do in the federal government, it's all about allowing someone to bring their authentic self, whoever they are, to the job, right? Like, we value each of you as individuals. I'll even circle back to the Supreme Court decision that Noah referenced. It's about allowing you to be your authentic self, to love who you want to love, to have that recognized in the same way that anybody else might have that recognized. And I think that's such a core strength of the federal government, is people can come and be their authentic selves. Doesn't matter what they believe politically, doesn't matter their different situations that they have. You can be your authentic self. Now let me tie it to the question. Before you know who you are as a leader, you have to know who you are as a person. And so I would encourage each of you to really try to understand yourself, to peel back whatever defenses you might have about who you are, and to really see and understand who you are as a person. When you do that, you can then figure out who you can be as a leader, what kind of leader you can be, what are your strengths that you can build upon, what are the weaknesses to work on. And then you can take that and you can translate it into your core values as a leader. We all need to have those core values, because when the world is chaos, when the job is chaos, when there is not nearly enough time to do all the things that are top priorities, what's going to guide you? What are you going to look to figure out where to go? You got to have those core values. And you got to, when it all comes down to it, you got to spend your time, your discretionary energy on advancing those things that are core to you. So that's my advice, Bob, is know who you are, really take a hard look, strip back those defenses, understand what kind of leader you can be, and then identify those core values and lead every day toward those core values.
Rob, you got the last word. Let's thank these panelists for the kind of thoughtful, creative, concerned advice that they gave. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.